Today on Mother Mayhem.
Knowing what happened to you is the intellectual part. Trauma work means dealing with the feelings part. Trauma work means connecting head to heart. Knowing what happened to you and connecting it to how what happened to you impacts you in your regular everyday. And that, my friends, is the part that takes time. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Mother Mayhem, the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Podcast for Daughters. I'm your host, Heather Gray, and today it's just you and me. I decided not to feature a letter today, and admittedly, I was a little bit torn about this, as I know those of you who have written in with your stories have been waiting really patiently for your turn. I've been sitting on a conversation that I've been wanting to have with you guys, hoping that at some point it would make sense to include in one of the conversations I was already having with a Mayhem listener. But a common sense segue just hasn't been appearing for this, so I had to create the room and the space for it myself, because I really do think it's a critical component for trauma recovery conversations and for narcissistic abuse recovery. Now, this episode marks 1 full year of Mayhem. The first 3 episodes dropped June 14th of 2023. It seems fitting that on our 1-year mark together, we meet in the way it started, with just me talking to you. However, I know we are all more than a little bit grateful that Clark is with us now, editing this conversation down for me and fixing the audio. I recently revisited our first episodes, and man, oh man, could we have used Clark in those first episodes together. I'm sitting with all of you today because I want to address an elephant in the room that doesn't get addressed often enough in the conversations like the ones we have. I'm talking about the reality that trauma recovery can take a freaking long time. Healing can take such a long time, and it can move so painfully slow for some of you sometimes that you think you'll never be done. And sometimes I know it can feel like it's taking over your whole life. So let's talk about it. First, let me just say, yes, trauma recovery takes time, especially when we're talking about childhood trauma connected to how we were parented. If you can zoom out the lens on this a little bit, you can see how this makes sense, right? You are parented for 18 years, and then even in adulthood, your parents are still around. So if you have been on the receiving end of patterned and chronic abuse for what amounts to decades, of course, it is going to take a while to heal. It took you decades to get that deep into the forest, so it's reasonable to expect that it's going to take some time to get out. To be clear, though, I am in no way saying that if you start trauma work at 22, you'll be in therapy or doing the work until you're 44. I don't think it's that literal, not nearly that literal, but you have all been through a lot. And it's going to take you all some time to acknowledge it, then unpack it, then organize it, and then reconstruct it in a way that makes better sense and is easier for you to deal with. The first thing that happens when the trauma light bulbs start going off is you find reasons for the things you've been thinking and feeling and experiencing. It is intense validation. Many of you in your notes to me mentioned that binging this podcast, even though I try to discourage you from doing so, and I get it. You have never heard someone explain to you that your relationship with your mother was abusive. You were never told that it wasn't your imagination and that you weren't crazy. And for many of you, you never knew that there were other women in the world like you and who have stories like yours. Many of you end up in awe that I've never met you, but it feels like I know you and that I've met your mother. It feels like I'm talking about you. After a lifetime of loneliness and disconnection, it will be downright intoxicating to finally have someone help you connect the dots. It'll light the sparks. You'll have insight. You'll make connections and you'll want to hear all the stories and get all of the information. For some of you, it will consume you for a while. And for many of you, it has already consumed you for a while. And I get it. There's a quote that I absolutely adore that says, "It's good to be loved, but it's profound to be understood." And the idea that I and this show can be that for you, that we can be a source of being understood, well, that's pretty much everything for me. It's why I keep pressing record each week. It's the thing that drives me. And I want you to understand yourselves. I want you to see that nothing that's happened to you is your fault. And I want you to believe in your bones that you didn't deserve it. And in a perfect world, I could just say, hey, this is what happened to you. This is why your heart hurts. This is why your body is tense, why you get anxious, why relationships are hard, why you people please, and why you don't know yourself very well. I could tell you this, and you would say, why, yes, Heather, that makes perfect sense to me. I'm not fucked up. I get it now, and I'm okay. But the hardest thing about trauma recovery is that it just doesn't work that way. You can't just know what happened to you and be better because trauma doesn't reside in your heads. It's in your bodies, it's in your memory, it's in how you view and experience the world. Knowing what happened to you is the intellectual part. Trauma work means dealing with the feelings part. Trauma work means connecting head to heart, knowing what happened to you and connecting it to how what happened to you impacts you in your regular everyday. And that, my friends, is the part that takes time. It's here that you have to dig into the really hard things, closely examine the way your experience has impacted you, identify where those things aren't working for you so you can make the movement necessary to change them. There's a significant component that I know we have already talked quite a bit about on the show, and that's how trauma puts you in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. I don't think I need to repeat that conversation here for this conversation. Anyone who needs that conversation, though, I would encourage you to visit the first 8 episodes of the show. I also revisited it back in episode 42, so you can head back there as well. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn is the body's response to trauma. It's when you feel dysregulated because your present circumstances remind you of your past circumstances. As you might imagine, learning to regulate your body and how to better connect with Wise Mind is a significant part of the work. And this is also something you've heard me walk women through on the show quite a bit as well. Now, the reason I'm bringing all of this up again is because we talk about this a lot. And when I talk about it, you hear me talk about trauma brain. You hear me say, trauma brain tells you XYZ, or it's because of trauma brain that you ABC. And all of that is important, true, and necessary for you to know. And it makes up a lot of the beginning parts of doing trauma work. Because until our bodies are regulated and until we can get you out of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, we can't really do anything else. Once you can connect for yourself that you've been impacted by trauma, we do need you to feel safe in your body. Until you feel safe in your body, we can't do anything else. Trauma brain runs the show until it knows you're safe, and that's how it should be. Full stop. But then this is where it can get so tricky and dicey because once you can name it, own it, and get trauma brain off the case, It's realistic that you should start feeling better. You know what happened. You feel safe in your body. Why don't you feel better? Why is there more? Well, sweetie, because once your body feels safe, it becomes okay for the darker underbelly of trauma to come to the surface. And yes, it gets darker than having a dysregulated body. This is where you unexpectedly find yourself deep in grief, grieving for the childhood you never had but always deserved, grieving for how hard your life has been because of your mom, grief. And it hits you between the eyes. It pierces your heart. You feel sad for your younger self and sad for your present day self. Then many of you get good and mad. For some of you, that anger will be energy that is directed outward. You'll be mad at the world, mad at people who have it easier, mad at everything. And as you have heard me say, we understand your anger around here. Anger is the part of you that realizes what you never had and always deserved. It makes sense, but without a plan for it or without a container for it, it can start to feel like it's taking on a life of its own. Anger, it becomes jealousy, it becomes resentment. You might start feeling judgmental, and that trips you into thinking you're becoming your mother. Some of you won't look outside of yourself and get outwardly angry. Some of you will direct that anger and you'll turn it inwards on yourselves. You might get mad at yourself. You might question yourself. You might blame yourselves. You might try to undermine your own experiences and tell yourselves that other people wouldn't be so bothered. Other people would be able to just get over it. For some, anger's going to go out and it's also going to go in and make a real mess of intense feelings for you to sort through and deal with. A lot of you, too, are going to come face to face with shame. You might feel immobilized because you're frozen in a shame spiral and you're stuck hating yourself. And people who hate themselves will, of course, struggle with fighting for themselves and standing up for themselves. You think this is your fault, that you've caused it somehow, or that there's something about you that you did or didn't do that contributed to everything that's happened to you, so you beat yourself up. You heard me talk just last week to Ray about this very thing and how she struggled with that. So you might end up hating others. You might end up hating yourself, or it might be a messy combination of all of the above. This right here, my friends, is why trauma takes so long, because it's never just about one thing. It's about what happens in our bodies. It's about how the present makes you think of the past and all of the inner child work that comes with that. And then it's about the story you tell yourself, about the world, and how those stories have been informed by your trauma. This is complicated, multi-layered stuff. Then, for many of you listening, you are doing all of this work while you're still in some form of a relationship with your mother. You're still in contact with her, in relationship with her, and connected to your abuser. And this isn't where I get on the no contact bandwagon. You guys know me by now, and I hope you trust me when I tell you that I respect where everyone is at in trying to find a way to balance their current relationships with their mothers in a way that works for them. But there's something we hear a lot in the trauma space, and that is that you can't heal in the environment that makes you sick. And this is what we're talking about. As long as you are in relationship with your mother, the trauma, it is still happening. It's ongoing. There's no PTSD because the abuse isn't in the past. And that requires trauma brain to be on the scene. And trauma brain puts you in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. See what I'm getting at here? This shit is hard. It's complicated, and you can't find a straight line to it in a map. Then it becomes assumed that it's easier for daughters who've gone no contact, but it isn't, because going no contact comes with a gigantic pile of loss, of rebuilding, and of starting over. All of this is hard, no matter which angle you're coming from. Getting your minds in line with your hearts and then your hearts in line with your actions is a lot. Working through it requires so many hard conversations with yourself and with others. It means not believing everything you think about yourself, and it means questioning your inner critic, but it also means coming to a place of acceptance. Acceptance that this is what happened, acceptance that this is what life handed you, and what's on you to sort through. And then it's about deciding, given what's happened to you and how it's impacted you, who do you want to be? How do you want to move through the world? What do you need? And are you willing to allow yourselves to have it? When I see people caught up in the web of their trauma, this is where they're getting stuck. They're not accepting what's happened to them. They know what's happened to them, of course, but they aren't accepting it. What do I mean by this? I mean naming and owning that your mother is a narcissist or is otherwise emotionally limited, and that it impacted you in X, Y, or Z ways. Many daughters trip up here and feel anger and feel heat rising to the surface for themselves because they think I'm saying that it's okay what happened to them, that it's not that big of a deal, or that they shouldn't be impacted. That isn't at all what I'm saying. It wasn't okay. It'll never be okay. But it did happen. It wasn't your fault, and you didn't deserve it. And I'm not ever going to tell you that you have to say it was okay, that it wasn't that bad, and that you should just get over it. But what I am telling you is that if you don't accept that this is what happened, that this is your story, then you will never get to the other side of it, because we don't ever have any control over what happened to us. All we can control is what we do in response to what has happened to us. And if we stay in the "it's not fair" part, or we stay in the "but it's so scary" part, the awful thing that happened to you owns you. It controls you. It impacts how you show up in the world. It impacts your relationship with yourself, how you treat yourself, how you make decisions for yourselves, and how you talk to yourself. It does the same with your relationships. Acceptance sounds like my mom created a really unpredictable environment for me. I never knew which end was up. As a result, I need structure and consistency in my life in order to feel safe, and I am going to create that structure and consistency in my life in the following ways. Acceptance is acknowledging what happened to you, acknowledging its impact on you, turning it into a needs statement, and then allowing yourselves to have it. And this so often is where daughters and other trauma survivors stop, and then they get stuck. Their inner critic pops in and says, "What? You need what? What's wrong with you? It shouldn't bother you that XYZ." You might find yourself saying to yourselves, "No one else needs ABC to do DEF." So you spend all of this energy on not needing ABC instead of just owning that you do and allowing yourselves to have it. I hear daughters doing this all the time. "Such and such shouldn't bother me. I'm being too sensitive. I can't bother someone. What? I'm not just going to ask someone to stop because my feelings got hurt. No one else's feelings would have gotten hurt." Refusing to acknowledge or meet your needs is refusing to accept what happened to you. We see this all the time with situations that dysregulate you as well. You don't think you should feel a certain way. You don't like that you feel a certain way, or you don't want your feelings to interrupt or inconvenience someone else's experience. So you deny your own emotional experience, and then in that moment, you self abandon. It's here again where resistance to acceptance pops in because you'd rather fight what you think, feel, and need than inconvenience someone else. That behavior then reinforces trauma brain that tells you to play small, to acquiesce, to fawn, to go without, rather than inviting wise mind to step in and say, "Girl, you've been through a hell of a lot. And as a result, you have needs and boundaries, and that's pretty cool. Everyone should have needs and boundaries, so how about we go and see about having them get met?" Each time your behavior, your words, and your inner dialogue align with wise mind, you heal a little bit more. Behaviors aligned with wise mind on repeat are how you change the patterned way you think, act, and talk to yourself about yourself. And all of this traces back to acceptance. See, guys, how that works a little bit? Then we have to get you to stop believing everything you think. I think a lot of people in therapy and in the recovery space do this a little bit out of order. They come to therapy wanting more confidence and wanting to believe in themselves more. But here's the thing, I have never, not once, have I ever convinced a client to like themselves more by talking to them or processing their pain. Self confidence comes with new actions done on repeat. But so often people don't want to do anything differently until they feel confident and ready to do it. But here's the Achilles heel on this conversation, because competence is what builds confidence, and confidence is what builds competence. See how that works? You need to do both together. And that means getting good and comfortable with being uncomfortable. And after a lifetime of being uncomfortable, no one is easily going to sign up for more discomfort. So instead, you numb out, you avoid, you tune out, and you dodge anything that closely resembles a feeling, a discomfort, or a need for a boundary. Getting you on the other side of your trauma means acknowledging that you'll have to work through even more discomfort. For some of you, it's going to mean allowing yourself to feel things and to not just stay in your brains and intellectualize. It's going to mean finding where in your body your feelings are being stored, what your feelings are trying to tell you, and then releasing them. It's going to mean walking that inner child through her pain and getting her to the other side of it. For others of you, it's the exact opposite. You're all up in your feelings. You have feelings up to wazoo, but you're in the rabbit hole, sitting and spinning and thinking more process is going to be your relief. That somehow more thinking will bring you the right answer. And once you have that right answer, you'll know the right thing to do. Not so much on that one. You can't just feel your way through it. You still need to partner with wise mind so that wise mind can remind you that what is happening in your present is not your past and that you are not prisoner to your past. Some of you have everything you need right in front of you. You have all the pieces, and it's just time to move differently, to be uncomfortable, to try new things, to communicate, to get closer to yourself, and to allow yourself to get closer to others. And in order to do all of that, ladies, you have to do something else. You need to give yourselves permission to get better. You have to give yourselves permission to overcome, not to just survive, but to thrive. And I can't tell you how hard this is for people. The idea that you can get better after a lifetime of abuse might seem implausible for you, but also that idea can feel so invalidating of your pain. I've shared with you how my mom died when I was 6, and as a young teen, I wrapped myself up in the idea that I was a motherless daughter. My experience had a name thanks to a book that had just come out. It gave me an identity, and I wrapped myself up in that identity for far too long. It was often one of the very first things people would learn about me. It was almost as if I was literally like, "Hi, I'm Heather, and I'm a motherless daughter." After some therapy, the ache had lessened and the grief had subsided, and I had found my way through a lot of it. It brought sentiment to me, but it didn't bring pain anymore. And that was a real struggle for me because that implied that it wasn't so bad that my mom had died. It was something that I had, quote unquote, gotten over. What does it mean to have gotten over the fact that your mom died? I thought that somehow because I was okay and getting good grades, that I was somehow implying I hadn't really loved my mom that much. And you should have seen the epic meltdown and a half that happened when someone told me that it seemed like my mom dying put me on a path and gave me talent and insight for social work. I wanted to rebel with every single goddamn fiber of my being. No way could something good come from something so awful, except for the fact that something good did come from something so very awful. I had to hold both, that it is awful that my mom died, but also because of my early experiences with loss, grief, and feeling things in a really big way, I did develop a talent for this work. Two things can be true. It can be awful that my mom died at only 31 years of age. And then I ended up, as a result, in a lonely and isolated childhood. And that also true. I turned out okay in the end. That turning out okay in the end part is where some of you might find yourselves resistant because you don't want anything to ever imply it wasn't that bad. It was that bad. And you can also be okay. Two things can always be true, but that is so hard to accept. See? There we go again with that word, accept. Accepting that this awful thing has happened to you, and also that you can work through it. And dare I cautiously say here, overcome it. Also, here's the thing that comes with acceptance. It means really understanding trauma and recognizing that some things will always have an effect on us. Some things will always bring out triggers or reactions in us. We're going to be sensitive to some things, and we can do all the work and all the healing and still have that be true. But the difference is that you will learn your reactions, learn what you need when you're having them, and allow yourself those needs. And other less dramatic moments, you're going to be able to think it through and talk yourselves off the ledge by saying, this is not that. Trauma brain's telling me XYZ, but I know ABC to be true. So I choose to lean on ABC, even though that comes with some vulnerability and might mean that I get hurt. Here's another story that's going to help this make a little more sense. So in 2005, I had a loved one in the hospital. I lived near Boston at the time, and the hospital was off of 93 South, and it was a really intimidating drive for me. You have to go through this big tunnel, and there are a few exits in the tunnel, including one for the airport. It always makes people drive pretty fast, and for me, it was always hard to know what lane to be in. And oh my God, I hated that drive. Those of you who know US sports might have heard of the Boston Garden. It's where the Celtics and the Bruins play. In any case, you can see the garden right before you enter the tunnel. Each day I'd drive to the hospital, I would see the garden, and I would know that the hairy, scary part of that drive was about to begin. So I'd lower my radio, my hands would sort of assume that 10 and 2 position, my jaw would set, and I would enter the tunnel, and I would make my way to the hospital. Well, after doing that ride enough, I got used to it, and I was able to fly through that tunnel like all of the other assholes. Years later, I'm driving that same ride with a friend. We're chatting, the radio's on. I see the sign for the garden, and instinctively and without thinking about it, I stop talking. I lowered the radio, I got my hands at 10 and 2, and I set my jaw. I wasn't actually scared in that moment, but my body memory had taken over and did what it always used to do at the visual cue of the garden. Trauma brain works in the very same way. Something can always happen that will remind you of where you've been and what you've been through. But that doesn't mean you're not done your healing. Because in those moments, you will be able to access wise mind, assure it that this is not that, and you'll be able to get on with your day. I know some of you listening struggle with chronic dysregulation. Others of you struggle with depression or anxiety. Some of you struggle with connection and tend to isolate. Trauma, we know, leaves a lasting mark. Getting on the other side of it means knowing you might always be affected in some way and choosing to respect that by taking care of yourself, tending to yourself, and allowing yourself whatever it is you need. Because here's the thing, in allowing yourself to get your needs met, you change the story. You heal that childhood wound and then end up reacting less and being less affected in the long run. Getting to the other side of it is ultimately about knowing and owning how your trauma has affected you, identifying what you need as a result, and allowing yourself to have it, rather than believing you aren't healed until it simply doesn't bother you anymore. As you do this work and as you listen to this podcast, that choice will always be open to you. Additionally, it's about looking at the ways you move through the world that no longer work for you, finding what you would prefer to do instead, and work on doing that. Trauma work is about so much more than talking, and it's about so much more than thinking. Change happens in the action, in what you choose and in what you don't choose. Change happens in your communication and how you show up and how you speak up. Many of you might be finding yourselves waiting to feel better before doing anything different, but you might not feel better until you do something differently. It is never going to be okay that you didn't have the mother or the childhood that you deserved. And it's a wound that will, of course, leave a lasting mark, likely for your whole lives. But it doesn't have to dictate your life. It doesn't have to define your life. And it doesn't have to sentence you to a life of pain. And while I have you here, I want you to know that many daughters tell me all they want in their lives is to feel peace and to feel safe. Those are really important things, and you're never going to hear me argue that. Peace and safety, however, are baseline, the minimum, the absolute minimum of what you all deserve. What I want you to know is that I want you to be happy. I want you to experience joy. I want you to be able to connect with others, to give and to receive love. I want you to love the hell out of your lives. I want all of those things for you. And I know that can be a lot to hear, to feel, and to receive. I have had clients push against me on this, not just because they don't quite believe it's possible for them, but because happiness, joy, meaningful connection, well, those things are pretty vulnerable. For many of you, they represent the greener grass on the other side. We know that greener grass sure is pretty, but it's also vulnerable as fuck. Because once you experience that joy, that happiness, that connection, or that fulfillment, you now have something to lose. They become things that can be taken from you. So it feels, of course, so much easier to just want and settle for peace and safety. After years of dysregulation and abuse and uncertainty, peace and safety, well, of course, they become that warm hug, that energy that comes with joy, happiness, connection, and full on living. Sometimes it can be a little bit jarring and intimidating, and that's okay. You can lean into it slowly and gently. Also, your joy, your happiness, your connections, and your feelings of fulfillment, they may look and feel different. It might not bounce off the walls, be brightly colored, or loud in any kind of way. That's okay. However, you experience joy, happiness, love, or fulfillment, I want those things for you. And I encourage you to give yourselves permission to have them. It's about letting the light in. And I believe that's possible for you. That's why I'm here. But I also know it doesn't work unless you choose it for yourselves, unless you give yourselves permission to have it. I recognize that I might not have convinced you yet. That's okay. We've only had a year together after a lifetime with your parents, and we are fighting years of programming and experience that might be telling you otherwise. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to keep working to earn your trust because we still have time. 1 year, 52 episodes and counting, friends. You are in a community of women around the world who are in this with you. I most definitely am too. Bye for now. I do hope you enjoyed today's conversation. If you have a question you'd like me to consider for the show, please do email me over at heather@daughtersnpd.com. You are always welcome to share your story or questions by recording yourself using the voice app on your phone. For best recording quality, please do record directly into your phone without using headphones or Bluetooth speakers. We're building an incredible community as well over on Instagram, and I'd love to see you over there too. You can find us at Daughters NPD. Lastly, if you love what you've been hearing here on Mayhem and have found the show helpful in your own trauma recovery, please do consider becoming a Mother Mayhem sponsor by purchasing simple scripts for saying hard things. It's a resource I created that provides the right words for the hard conversations, and it covers life, love, and work. You'll find a link for that in the show notes. If you know another woman who needs this conversation in her life, please do share the show with her. Your reviews and social shares help spread the word, and I hope you'll consider doing so. Special thanks to Heather Clark for editing the show. She's in my head and knows what I meant to say when the words come out backwards. Thanks so much for your time today. As always, I'm in it with you. Bye for now.